This podcast is sponsored by Pax. Whether on the water, on land or in the air, Pax bags are both versatile and flexible backpacks that are perfectly suitable for your requirements in the most demanding of environments. Pax bags are highly regarded due to their exceptional performance in pre-hospital and in critical care environments. Their well-organised compartments and customisable configurations enhance efficiency in high-stress situations. They're designed with infection control in mind and are easy to clean and disinfect. So highly visible colours and reflective strips aid quick identification and adherence to quality standards, ensuring reliability. So the versatility of Pax bags caters to diverse EMS providers, and they deliver vital equipment, durability and ease of use for pre-hospital critical care services globally. I've used Pax bags in a number of critical care situations, and they're absolutely excellent, both in identification of kit, but also in identification of the reflective strips to ensure visibility. So please see the show notes for further details.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Hello, my name is Keir Rutherford. Welcome back to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast. In 2016, an article published in an ISIS online magazine called for its followers to undertake attacks using vehicles. The article encouraged attacks on large outdoor events, including street festivals and outdoor markets that were likely to be densely packed by pedestrians. It also recommended the ideal type, weight and speed of a vehicle. Terrorism has not followed the anticipated post-9/11 trajectory. Further attacks producing tens or hundreds of thousands of casualties through the use of weapons of mass destruction that many authorities presumed may happen next was not allowed to happen. The hostile operating environment played on terrorist organisations by the security services has seen a shift in how such organisations recruit and undertake terrorist attacks. Online radicalisation and recruitment through online magazines and social media is capable of reaching a broad audience, providing potential recruits with inspiration and instructions. In return, this has led to a change in terrorist tactics. Campaigns have been replaced by one-off, smaller-scale attacks, mostly undertaken by unconnected individuals operating alone with limited resources. Using a vehicle is ideal for those individuals intent on undertaking an act of mass violence. Vehicles are readily available, limited skill is required, and little preparation or training is necessary. Following its publication, there has been a rise in vehicle-borne attacks. One of the most deadly was in Nice, France, in 2016 during the Bastille Day celebrations. 87 people were killed and 458 injured. The majority of those who died on scene or immediately after arriving in the hospital suffered from exsanguinating pelvic fracture. Vehicle attacks are predominantly associated with Islamic terrorism. However, they are used as weapons by criminals and during road rage incidents. There has also been an increase in attacks using vehicles involving the far right and the far left during protests. 104 such incidents of people driving vehicles into protests between May 27th and September the 5th, 2020 were recorded in the United States. Nevertheless, attacks undertaken by those proclaiming allegiance to jihadist groups have shown to be more lethal. The severity of injury and mortality following such attacks are far higher compared to those injured during non-intentional pedestrian collisions. This is likely due to the pattern of injury being significantly different from non-intentional pedestrian trauma as a result of the sustained acceleration of the vehicle and the resultant high kinetic energy. This is compared with other cases of pedestrians hit by vehicle, in which the driver is often trying to de-accelerate or avoid the impact altogether. Head, face, spinal, pelvic and lower extremity injuries are significantly more common in those injured after being intentionally struck. Vehicle-borne attacks can create considerable complexity for the emergency services responding to them. The scene is often spread over a large area. In the case of Nice, the scene was over 1 mile long. The use of improvised explosive devices, guns and bladed weapons creates different mechanisms of injury and further challenges for the emergency services to overcome, such as the terrorist attacks at London Bridge and in Barcelona. Over the last few months, we have seen a spike in such attacks in Europe and the US, with most being carried out under the banner of Islamic terrorism. Today, I'm joined by Bill Salmeron, who is the Chief of EMS for New Orleans. Bill is joining me to discuss the recent terrorist attack on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter of New Orleans last New Year's Eve, and how he and his colleagues from New Orleans EMS responded to the incident. Bill, thank you and welcome to the Pre-Hospital podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Bill, first of all, would you mind just telling us about your role and giving us a kind of brief overview of what the system looks like in New Orleans for New Orleans EMS?
Sure. So I'm the chief of New Orleans EMS. New Orleans EMS is a municipal EMS service. We only do 911 calls for the city. That's our job. We also have a paramedic rescue service that's attached to our department, as well as other specialty teams, tactical and other teams that provide support, to other functions in the city. We got around 174 employees is the size of our department. We have, obviously vacancies like everybody else does, but that's our force right now that we can hopefully get it back up to. We do about 70,000 calls a year. We transport about 50,000 patients. On average, each day we have anywhere from 22 to 24 ambulances on the street. And then we do also utilize basic life support units, advanced EMTs or the intermediate level as well, to help with those calls as well. So we do have a mixed system. It's not just all paramedics. It's all, we do have a tiered system.
And you also have, is it correct, you also have supervisors that will respond to calls?
Yes. So on each watch, we have multiple supervisors that support the field crews. On average, you have 2 supervisors and 1 assistant supervisor. And then you have also a senior paramedic or a field training officer that's also in the field that provides additional on-scene support to units. So usually for the higher acuity calls, you have a sprint car that responds with the ambulance. That sprint car has, has blood and other supplies at that advanced level to kind of help with that patient. So similar to, I think, your critical care kind of paramedic program.
Yeah.
So,
thank you. Could you, obviously New Year's Eve is historically here in the UK, certainly for the London Ambulance Service, who I work for, is one of the busiest kind of days, or certainly evenings of the year, for the level of calls that it receives, especially some of the complex incidents that we might have to respond to, and some of the kind of, certainly around, from a critical care point of view, we see a kind of large number of critical care patients on New Year's Eve. Can you just talk us through the events of what happened on New Year's Eve, kind of leading up to what happened in the early hours, and just what New Year's Eve is in New Orleans? I imagine it's fairly similar to what London is.
Yeah, it is. We have in what we call the hospitality zone, which is downtown French Quarter. We normally, in addition to our normal 911 coverage, we do put up several resources in that area to respond to the special events that are going on. So usually on New Year's Eve, we have a New Year's Eve parade. There's fireworks along the river at midnight. And then the French Quarter is pretty much busy the entire day, and then into the early morning of New Year's Day. Usually we have a football game. It's called the Sugar Bowl, which is a college football game that happens on January 1st. And so usually we have anyone who is attending those games come in, the teams, if they're close by, then you have a lot of folks that come in town for that game. And that usually happened the next day. So it was busy throughout the day as far as people and crowds, as we normally see. And usually within those, within the French Quarter and the hospitality zone, we deploy a number of different units. We have supervisors in the sprint cars or quick response vehicles. We have the ASAP carts, which are the ambulance carts with the box in the back, just like an ambulance gets into small areas. And then we also have bike teams and things like that we put into the smaller, into those congested areas that we can get to patients quicker. The French Quarter, historically has always been, very, very crowded. We have to go in and get them out and bring them to an outside transfer point to get them transported. So, and now, even for New Year's Day, we had the vehicle barriers that were already up on Bourbon. And so, that we can't just drive an ambulance to pick up a patient. We have to get on foot a lot and bring people out. So this incident, so it was around 3 o'clock in the morning. We were just about to start releasing the upstaff coverage that we had for the French Quarter. And at 3:15, it happened, right? He made the turn and sped down Bourbon, and that was it. So our staff was immediately on scene. They were right across the street where the car made the turn from Canal Street onto Bourbon Street. And they saw it, and they just started getting to work on the patients that they found, and then it just progressed into more. So.
How far did he drive before he was stopped?
So he got into the 300 block of Bourbon. So he went into the third, so 3 streets into the French Quarter. And Bourbon Street is about 11 blocks worth of people.
Yeah.
And so he made the turn. He did his damage in the 3-block area, and then he crashed into a lift truck that was already on Bourbon. So fortunately, he crashed, right? If he didn't, he would have kept going and hit a lot more people continuing down the street.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's I think of my experiences and experiences of my colleagues that it must, in terms of responding to these incidents, for your colleagues who were there, who potentially witnessed it, that must have been very harrowing to then have to respond to that, to change your mindset into that, especially when I imagine people were getting ready to go home. That must have been really hard for them. I can imagine that must have been, very difficult. The attack was clearly very complex and challenging to respond to. I think probably for those who were arriving afterwards, but certainly for those who were already there covering the event. And there's obviously the added complexity of gunfire, and I'm aware that IEDs were found as well. Could you discuss, from a leadership point of view and being a leader of people and having to make difficult decisions sometimes, could you discuss how you manage risk and what advice you could offer to other emergency responders who may find themselves in a similar situation, having to balance risk versus their safety, especially when there are critically injured patients that might need their care?
Yeah, we deal with a lot of smaller MCIs on a regular basis. Our staff is amazing. They're great clinicians. They know sick, not sick. They can identify someone who needs to go or can wait a second. But they do a great job of getting on scene and moving if they have to. When it first happened, we thought it was, a regular, I hate to say a regular vehicle ramming, unfortunately. Every event, because of people drink or go the wrong way down the street or whatever it is, we on a regular basis have people that drive and they may hit a few people, especially in the French Quarter and downtown area. And so, we thought it was, that, right? And then, we are used to the police department being dispatched and on scene for violent calls or anything that may be dangerous. And right when it happened, the police department was calling for EMS over the radio, have, this one down or that one down. And so, we took for granted that the scene was safe, because every time the police call us, we assume the scene is safe, right? Or we've learned If it's dangerous, they come out, they make it safe. We go in, we take the patient, we bring them out, and everything's fine. Knowing after the fact that, our staff, including me, walked past a bomb.
Yeah.
And actually 2 bombs, right? And so when the vehicle crashed, police exchanged gunfire. They killed the subject. And then we had staff coming from Canal, and then we had one of our rescue technicians that was coming around the backside, and they met up at the truck. And so as they met at the truck, they, pronounced the driver, and then they had some people that were under the vehicle pinned against the lift truck that he ran into. And as they were doing that, the police said, "Hey, we got to get out of here. He has explosives in the truck, so we have to back up." And so that was, they did what they had to do, and they all retreated to it, to what we thought was a safer distance, but actually was closer to another IED. So knowing that, we could have lost a lot more people, including our staff. It was sobering. We don't encounter that. We actually shouldn't encounter this type of incident in the civilian EMS world, and we do. And so yeah, it definitely makes you think twice about safety, right? That you're never safe on a scene, no matter who's there, and that you always need to be prepared for getting out, have an exit strategy, know how to get out safely. Yeah.
I think that's really sound advice. And I think it's you can only assess, although you're making a balanced risk assessment, you can only assess on what you can see in the information that you're being told. And I think as well, it's hard as well, as certainly when you've got injured police officers, and you've got injured kind of your own, really, and that's hard. Kind of responding to that.
I mean, EMS, that we're a risk management organization. We're not risk aversion, right? We can't totally eliminate all the risk, and we see that's the job that we do. We take those risks, those calculated risk, and try not to get into a point where we're going to get hurt or lose anybody else, or but yeah, we can't just not go in, right? And so making sure our staff knows, make sure, and for everybody, just make sure that you're always aware of what's around you. And so, yeah.
Is there anything you could reflect on? I'm aware. What was your role that night because I know you'd left, I believe, and then
so I just got off work. I went home. The supervisor called me, said, "Hey, we got some folks that were hit by a truck." And I said, "Well, okay, how many?" And he's like, 3, 4-ish, right? And so I said, "All right, well, just let me know. Let me know if it gets bigger than that, right? And just keep me in the loop." And so I turned my radio on. I was curious. Something told me to turn my radio on. And I heard my staff, going down and pronouncing so many dead here, so many injured here. And so at that point, it was big. And so I got dressed and went back in and found my team doing a phenomenal job, as they always do. They were already established a command structure, a casualty collection point. And so I just stood back and I said, "Look, you guys are doing a great job. I'm here if you need me. I'll be right behind you." And then I started to take care of what I had to take care of at my level, as far as notifications, communicating with other public safety leadership, hospitals. That's the stuff that at my level, I had to get started. So
that's really I kind of take from that it's almost empowering your staff to do what they need to do and to do what they're trained to do. And although sometimes you may arrive as a senior, actually there's people that are adequately trained to do that role.
We tell our people that and no matter who you are, if you're an EMT or a paramedic or a supervisor, it's your scene. If you're first on scene, your job is to figure out what's going on, call for additional resources, and start to set up that scene for success, right? And so and our team did that. established it. They called for help. They started to, push resources down Bourbon Street to try to figure out what was going on. And then on Canal Street, which is right outside of Bourbon Street, they started to establish sort of that staging area for units and things like that. And so setting up a scene is important in the first few minutes. It's going to be hard to catch up, once you don't have something, once you need to start moving cars, or because, our other public safety partners, police and fire and everybody else, they'll respond to, right? And they'll maybe block you up sometimes, right? Block you into a scene. And so they were very helpful on scene, the police that were there. And we said, look, I need this whole area clear to get ambulances in. And that's what they did, right? And so we had a great on scene team that was managing everything. So
how do you the number of resources that attend these kind of is from multiple different services and fire, EMS, police, as well as kind of maybe other agencies. What can you kind of talk to the best strategies around how to communicate people, especially under extreme stress, and when people are maybe feeling fear and a lot of stress, and how that can affect how people communicate sometimes? Is there any strategies that you could talk to around how to ensure that people aren't losing situational awareness and you're achieving those things like having vehicles moved? And
yeah, so really it's and if you talk to our staff, I mean, they'll tell you that that night they went into response mode just like they normally do, right? And so they were focused on making sure that they were assessing everyone, getting them to a hospital, and doing everything they had to do on scene. Making sure that we have the ability to to communicate with other agencies is really important. So for all events, including this event, we have event meetings. We have an incident action plan that is established for every large event, so we know what channels everybody is working on. All of our radios for police and fire, all of our partner ambulance services that respond, our mutual aid, we all have each other's channels, and so we have what's called interop channels for every parish, which is a county equivalent, I guess you can call it. That we have certain numbers of interop that everybody's got, and so usually for special events we we operate on one of those interop channels. That if we need additional resources, if we call for help, then all they have to do is to go over to that channel, and we can communicate directly with them. So being interoperable is very important. We have hundreds of channels on our radio. I mean, literally hundreds, and so we can pretty much talk to anybody, and they can talk to us, right? And we make sure we plan for that. And if we need to, we can do that. So I don't think communication really was the issue that night. We all knew what we were doing. We all had a job to do. We were able to communicate via radio, or there were a lot of police on scene. And so our folks were able to communicate directly with them. And the hospitals were notified, and everything went the way it should have gone. MCI operations never go perfectly, right? I think we plan for, we train everybody of what the tags are and what colors that each one means, right? And you assess them and how many times they're breathing, are they conscious, can they walk, whatever it is. And so we don't really train them for the reality of you have to make tough decisions. And so that's what our folks did that night is make those tough decisions. Usually with people, usually with scenes with the police department, it's we have enough resources, and on that scene that night, we have police officers doing CPR on folks that were just not able to be saved. They had family members holding their relatives that just were killed, and our staff, had to say no, and we never say no.
Yeah.
And I mean, we will throw everything at a patient to try to save them on a daily basis, right? And we do it every day, and the police see that, and they know we'll do that. And so there was confusion with the police, and there were some feelings around that. Oh, look, I'm doing what I'm doing for this patient. Why can't you do something? But we had to tell them, look, I have to go to this patient over here that's red and critical, or this one over here, and we can't do anything for your patient, in that MCI moment. Now, if it was
Yeah.
just that patient, we try our darndest to do everything that we can, and transport them, and treat them whatever we need to do. And so that was hard for our people. The police, it was hard. There were some feelings around that too. So yeah, it's when we train, and I was talking about this at one of the other podcasts that we did, is we have some young EMTs and paramedics, and we bring them through training, and like I said, we train them on the tags, but do you really train them to decide if someone lives or dies? And that's tough. That's tough for a seasoned medic.
I,
It's,
I, I can completely relate to that. Completely. And I think, having done major incident training, I was never prepared for what the true reality of these incidents are.
yeah,
And I think the lasting effect that those decisions walking by people can have.
yeah.
And I think, exactly like you said, we do our best for patients, and, actually these situations are not normal, and they're extreme circumstances. Um, do you One of the complexities of these incidents is how far they can be spread out, and how that can then stretch perhaps resources over an extended scene. I think you discussed how your teams walked down the street. How did they manage patients over such a large distance? Did they bring them together, or were they able to kind of bring ambulances to where they were lying? Or
So as I said, it was a 3 block scene on Bourbon. We we had a casualty collection point established about a block and a half in, and that was the collection point that anybody who had to be transported was basically carried to that point. Um, so that way we can bring ambulances in, and they can pick them up and then go down the street and go back to the hospital. So that's what the team found easiest to do. So all the resources, if they needed more boots on the ground, or whatever it is to help them do whatever, we sent everybody to that point. Um, I had a deputy chief at that casualty collection point that was helping to run things with the on-scene command. And then we had a number of staff members that were working, to do what they had to do and move those patients. And then we had a secondary casualty collection point that was established on Canal Street, in the big area for green patients. And so as people were walking out or being assisted to walk out, they were placed in that area, so we can, monitor them, and then eventually transport them to the hospital. So really that, having that forward command and that forward casualty collection point, was essential to get people, get people out.
so it sounds like they split the scene essentially
They
into
did, yeah,
multiple, and
right.
that completely removed
Mhm.
challenges of. Um,
Yeah.
would you be able to describe? Clearly, we discussed in the opening introduction around the extent of injuries that patients can suffer. Um, are you able to talk to some of the injuries that patients sustained, and
Yeah.
if that posed any challenges in terms of, from previous experience? I know that non-intentional kind of multi-patient vehicle incidents I've been to around, you know unable to cannulate certain patients, and that increases their time on scene, in terms of being able to administer analgesia or sedation. Are you able to just talk to the injuries, and if
Yeah.
that was caused any
Yeah,
challenge?
it was obviously a lot of blunt trauma, right? Torso and lower extremity stuff. Um, we did have three patients that sustained injuries from the gun exchange with the officers, right? And so we had a few gunshot wounds, mainly the police department. It was two officers that sustained injuries from that. But we found 12 patients that were deceased on scene. We had 12 red tags, which are the immediate patients that needed to move, 9 yellow, mainly because they couldn't walk, but they were stable, so we had to get the reds out first. And then we had 8 patients kind of walking around with green that we were able to eventually get them transported. So we did transport a total of 29 patients to 5 different hospitals. In the end of the incident, we had about 57 injuries total. That was people who went to the hospital afterwards because of whatever it went, personal vehicle or ride share or whatever it is. So yeah, it was a lot of blunt and the penetrating so yeah, and it was consistent with vehicle ramming. I mean, it wasn't, there is nothing that was odd or strange about it. It was you expected the types of injuries that you saw. So
Yeah. You've spoken about triage. We've just in the UK moved over to 10-second triage.
Mhm.
That's just kind of come in really in the last year. What triage system did you use, and how was it undertaken? Were there a small team undertaking triage, or was it just done by everybody? Or
Yeah, so we use Start Triage here, and we use the Smart Triage tags, which is the ones that fold up and in the pouch, and so we use that system here. Um, Anybody that was on scene, you pretty much were triaging, and once you laid out, from what our staff is doing on scene, is once they've laid eyes on everybody, established what category you were in, and then treat any life threats, right? Which the majority of it was, blunt internal injuries that we couldn't really do too much on scene, except to know, hey, this is a pretty serious injury. This one needs to go sooner than later. So we didn't have, again, that's one of those things that, the MCI incidents don't go as planned, right? You expect to have a triage team and a treatment team and a staging team, and kind of, everybody has multiple jobs, right? And so you're triaging, but then, all right, you've triaged everybody. Now you're going to move to transporting, right? Or treatment, right? And so everybody had multiple roles. And it wasn't, I mean, for 29 patients, it really, it wasn't a lot to continue. I mean, we triaged everybody quickly, and then we just moved right into, the treatment and the transport stuff. So.
I've been following your kind of blood program for a while. Did any patients receive blood that night?
No, not
No.
that night.
The primary focus was to, given the extent of some of the injuries, to move them off.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Get them going. Right. We, that's one of the things that, like I said before, of you need to be able to identify those patients and move them, and in a semi-hazardous environment like that, spending a little bit more time on scene,
Yeah.
giving blood or doing that extra treatment, unless they really needed it, if it was an airway or they needed an IV for medications, or, I mean, most of the stuff we can do IM, and airway stuff, we can, put something in real quick and move. But we didn't spend a lot of time on scene, and blood really wasn't, we didn't find blood would be useful in that case. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Now, in the long run, the patients needed blood when they got into the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't initiate any of that on scene. So,
Do you know the times that you were able to get most of your kind of, certainly the kind of red patients or the P1 patients off scene? I'm guessing it was fairly quick.
yeah, so all of our patients were assessed and transported within 95 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty quick then,
Yeah.
from the point of, yeah. I think we've spoken a bit around what your staff had to deal with, and certainly maybe witness as well. There's some evidence to suggest that 1/3 of kind of first responders going to a major incident may develop PTSD. Can you talk about the importance of caring for your staff, after these events, and what processes you put into place to care for them. Because I think there's a lot. I think we're changing the culture around this now,
Yeah.
and I think it's something that I think going back to training, we talk about responding and doing everything, but we
Mhm.
don't talk about what you may experience and be exposed to, and then we certainly don't talk about or train people for the aftermath
Yeah.
of it. Can you talk to how I'm sure, yeah, what you did for everybody?
Yeah. Um, we have an on-site full-time mental health coordinator who is a licensed professional social worker or a therapist. She works with our staff on a daily basis for any needs that they may have related to just the daily job. In New Orleans, the public safety agencies have that resource that's full-time in their department. So police, fire, and EMS, we all have our own mental health coordinator that is a practitioner that can do that in-person, treatment, right? So that night, we once everybody was transported, we made sure we did a quick head count on scene, make sure everybody was okay. Um, Brought everyone up, just all right, everybody go back to the office, punch out. Let's talk for a second. And so we did. Our counselor came in, our mental health coordinator came in, and she was able to, work with a few people, make sure that everyone was in a good place at that point. And then we gave them a few days off to sort of just process everything um, with our counselor, following up with them, making sure they were okay. And then we started the debriefings with them, right? And then just all of our staff. And, it's not just those that responded to the scene. It's you have folks that, came into work for that next shift right after the incident. And they were scared. They didn't know if there were more bombs or if there were more things that they would have to, be concerned about. And so it really stressed a lot of people out. It really did. And so, and rightfully so. We need to take care of that. And so we were able to do, within a week, we did 5 different debriefings with staff. Um, just allow not, and it really wasn't an after action. It was more of the critical incident debriefing of, let's talk about what you did. Let's talk about how you feel. And then we can address kind of any concerns at that point. And then one of the hospital, a trauma center, they have a trauma counseling program that they work with victims of trauma on a regular basis. They also made themselves available for healthcare workers, police, fire, or EMS, any first responders that needed it. And so we had a group, what was called a heart huddle, a few days later at the hospital, in which we all came together and we were able to, to kind of talk through a lot of that, just like we did in the individual debriefings. And so, and then we made make sure that our employees had access to our employee assistance program, and any coverage that would be needed for that. And so, usually the employee assistance program allows, so many free visits for, mental health, or if you need anything else that is job related, right? I think we have always, our thought around mental health is that, if you take care of someone immediately, it's less likely they're going to develop that longer term PTSD. So, we wanted to make sure we addressed it early and tried to prevent, any issues. And everybody came back to work that following week. And they continue to follow up with our mental health coordinator, as they always do. And they're back. So I think we were fortunate that we had a lot of resources, afterwards to do that. So you got to take care of your people. And so I think mental health is, as you said, it really has taken on a new form of existence in EMS. As far as it's not taboo anymore. It's okay to say you're not okay. It's okay to say, look, I'm not okay, and I need help. And so certainly we need to continue that. And we will. So
I think it's really important to have those conversations because it removes the taboo, and it removes that actually what we do, even day in, day out, is really hard. And we see
Yeah.
some really bad stuff. And
Hmm.
some of the stuff that we see is not normal. And your staff's the most important people. You can't replace your experienced staff. Um, and when you lose people, it's very difficult to get them, kind of get them back. So that, yeah, great. Have you identified any organizational learning from New Year's Eve that you will act on that will help in a kind of future response should you ever have to manage such a situation again?
No, I think we responded as we would normally respond. I think we did a great job. I don't think there's a lot of things that we would change. Scene safety is a main takeaway that we need to make sure that we know that a scene is not 100% safe, and you need to be able to get out if something happens. And so, and then also kind of managing expectations with law enforcement and other agencies that don't know that our method of um, operation is different in an MCI versus a normal call for service, And so, like I said, if we have even 3 or 4 patients that are critically injured, or a trauma code, or whatever it is, we're going to work that. If it's a normal call in MCI, we're not going to do that. And so we're trying to, we're going to better educate law enforcement on, what do we do for a normal call versus when we have more patients that we can't help. And so, that was a lesson learned for us as far as that, and we have made contact with the officers that were on scene, and so I think they better understand. But I mean, they're not the only ones that would feel that. And then we have to train our students, whether it be EMT or paramedic students. How do you create that mental resiliency
Mhm.
that you need to do the job? Like I said, we can train them to do anything. We can train you to take a test and pass it and hit the streets and start treating patients, but you need to have the mental resiliency and the strength to deal with these situations on a daily basis. And then when you encounter a situation like this, it's you need to know how to deal with that. And so, how do you teach an 18 or 19-year-old um,
Yeah.
that resiliency to do that? And it's hard. It really is. And then not only that, younger folks, but also anybody in your department. How do you teach them to get in a good frame of mind to manage a scene and make those hard decisions? And so I think that's a challenge for a lot of us is that. So
I think that would be the case for here and probably internationally as well. Um, and certainly, how do we change our training to for people? Yeah, as you said, to have that resilience to respond to such incidents, certainly when it's completely unexpected, and then kind of try and function in what is something that's very abnormal. Um, kind of I appreciate your time.
oh, no problem.
I've got just kind of coming towards the end. Is there one, if there was one key lesson that you could pass on to those listening, um, around responding to incidents such as New Year's Eve, what what would that be if you had one or not at all?
This can happen anywhere. As you said in your intro, there's a lot of um, people that are radicalized by whatever the idea is, right? Whatever they support. And you don't have to be a terrorist to do this. You can just be someone that wants to cause mayhem and death, right? But this can happen anywhere, no matter how big your city is or department. Um, this is possible. Vehicle ramming is like you said was one of is a low tech, easy thing to do, uh, and so you need to know that you're at risk for anything, especially this. And, we've, for years, our city hasn't been a target for terrorism. We've always known we were a soft target. I mean, we're a large city. We have Mardi Gras, which is the world's largest free open party, right? And we've always been a soft target, and we've taken that for granted, I think. We've done our best to manage that and mitigate it. I know the police department is one of the best to manage crowds here and events. But you have to prepare for something like this, and and then exercise and drill for it. We had an exercise a couple of months before going into Super Bowl with our mutual aid partners and hospitals, and so making sure that who the players are and that you're talking ahead of time is really important. But that's my advice to anyone. It could happen to you, and be prepared for it. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we've missed that you feel is important to discuss, that you would like people to know or to adopt, or was there anything else that you feel you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered everything. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to tell our story. And my like I said, my advice was, it could happen to anybody. Just be prepared, And then when you plan for something, we all plan for like the worst case of everything, and it's fun to do that, but you need to plan for your more common case scenario. What is something that you're more likely going to respond to, and you need to prepare for that, because you can plan for thousands of people that are injured and this and that, but you're never going to be able to do something like that unless you have the resources. And so, and the likelihood of something major like that happening is very, very low. So, focus on that stuff that is more likely to happen. So,
Bill, thank you for your time.
Yeah, no.
And thank you for your insight. I've taken a lot away from what you've said, and I'm sure many other people will have as well. So thank you, and thank you to your staff as well that responded that night, and the professionalism that they obviously displayed, representing our profession around the world. So thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks,
You too.
Bill.
Thank you very much.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.